been a long time coming, but we finally have an all-new Infiniti QX80, or as I like to think of it, the Japanese Escalade. Some of you might be thinking, hang on, couldn't that also describe the Lexus LX? Well, I would venture no. We'll talk about this more in this episode, but the QX80 is certainly more on-road focused, especially versus the latest LX models, the new Overtrail trims. This is a more on-road focused model, certainly more focused on passenger comfort and opulence on the inside. It has the best interior we've ever seen from Infiniti, but is it good enough to rival the Escalade, the Navigator, and the Wagoneer? Let's find out. Let me know what you think of the design in the comments section. Audi didn't reinvent the wheel, but they certainly squared that wheel off in this generation. Previous QX80s, and honestly a number of other previous Infinitis, were rightly accused of being a little bit too bubbly, a little bit too round, maybe fish-faced up front. Even though Infiniti over the ages grafted a new grille onto that previous QX80, it still had very rounded hood bulges, etc. This has that same theme where we find 3 bulges across the front, but we also have much sharper creases and a more flat front and just a generally more pleasing design to the eye. That piano key theme wraps from front to rear, as you can see with that DRL right there and the turn signal module. We then have the headlights down below. These are projector high beams and projector low beams. No active matrix technology going on here, so no software upgradability in the future. They do have a pretty nice beam pattern at night, but the adaptive feature is not quite my cup of tea compared to some in the luxury segment. You'll definitely notice more of a song and dance in Mercedes and BMW models, and the auto high beam function is not quite as quick at recognizing oncoming traffic as some. Without a doubt, there's a great deal of common ground with the Lexus LX. They're both body-on-frame SUVs, they're both powered by twin-turbo V6s, and they're both related to a rugged mainstream alternative. In this case, the Nissan Armada. In the case of the Lexus, the legendary Land Cruiser. But perhaps because of that Land Cruiser connection, the LX is a decent amount shorter than this. And it's really the odd man out, because at 211.2 inches long, this is almost exactly the same size as a short wheelbase Escalade. The Wagoneer is a little bit longer, but certainly the Lincoln Navigator is right about this same size. Now, those options all have long wheelbase versions that will definitely add quite a lot to the rear. We don't find one in the QX80, but if we're talking about the bulk of sales in North America, this is right in line with the mainline competition. The Land Cruiser and the LX, they're about a foot shorter than this, and they have a 9-inch shorter wheelbase. That wheelbase is definitely important when it comes to especially second row room, but also the relative positioning of the third row. The third row in the LX, it's really quite small. This, it's about the same size as most of the competition. A little bit smaller than some, but right in line with some others. So in the game of which of these things is not like the other, it would actually be the LX and no longer the QX80. The previous QX80 had some unusual proportions. That's the nice way of saying it looked weird from some angles. This is certainly much more mainstream luxury in terms of its styling, although you'll notice it definitely still has kind of a tall and narrow look, even though it's actually not taller or narrower than most of the competition. I think it's simply the styling and perhaps the bumper down below, which doesn't stick out nearly as much as in the previous QX80. It has much more of a normal arrangement of the glass, the hatch, and then the bumper below, but it does still have a slightly more prominent bumper than in some. It really doesn't have that really flush look like we find in some SUVs. That's probably going to protect the hatch a little bit more in the event of a rear ender. We have full LED taillights in the back with this sort of piano key-like theme for the red elements and amber turn signals in the rear. Unlike many of the American competition, we don't have a separately opening glass hatch, and of course if you look at the Lincoln Navigator, that has a tailgate and a hatch, which is kind of a cool touch. But we do have a windshield wiper or window wiper tucked nicely up underneath that spoiler in the back. Infiniti has followed Audi down the fake exhaust tip rabbit hole, although I guess you could say that due to their scale, they're more exhaust slots than exhaust tips. Anyway, slice it though, they're non-functional. They don't even work for aero. There's a black plastic plug at the back. The only exhaust tip is tucked up over there on the passenger side, and the other thing tucked up under the bumper is a full-size spare tire, although it's not the same size as the tires that we find all the way around. That's a trend that we're seeing even in vehicles with full-size spares where it's a big full speed rated tire, but it's not the same tire that we find on all four corners. When Infiniti says the QX80 is all new, they really mean it. We have a new body, new frame, new engines, transmissions, and a new interior. But of all the changes, the engine and transmission are perhaps the most consequential. This engine is now a twin-turbo V6, 3.5 liters, producing 450 horsepower, 516 pound-feet of torque. That's more than 100 pound-feet of torque more than the outgoing V8 engine. On the other hand, that Infiniti V8 was absolutely fantastic, except for the fuel economy. This gets 2 miles per gallon better in the city and 2 miles per gallon better on the highway versus that outgoing V8, but interestingly, the same highway score. It does produce more power and more torque than that old V8 engine, but oddly enough, this model's actually a little bit slower 0 to 60 than the last QX80 we tested. That mainly has to do with the way that twin-turbo V6s produce their power. Infiniti says they were interested in improving towing performance and improving drivability, both of which I do think are better on this V6 than the V8, but doesn't sound quite as nice when it's doing it. If you want to know more about how the QX80 tows, we're going to have a separate deep dive video into that, but long story short, thanks to gobs of torque and that torque happening at lower RPMs, this does really well when it comes to trailer towing. Although, because we don't have quite as much torque off idle, it's not actually as quick 0 to 60 without the trailer on the back. With the trailer on the back, oddly enough, this is actually a little bit quicker 0 to 60 than the old V8. So it kind of depends on exactly what you expect out of your big SUV. If towing is your bag, this will tow up to 8,500 pounds when properly equipped. It's actually about the same as a Dodge Durango and below a lot of the full-size American SUV competition. If, for instance, you have Jeep's full-size SUV, from the right ear, mind you, you can tow up to 10,000 pounds in that model. After a week and several hours on the highway towing, I found the front seats to be very comfortable. Keep in mind that I am driving the very top-end trim. We have 4-way adjustable lumbar support, inflatable side bolsters, and a massage function. However, the massage is not as aggressive as the one that we find especially in the Grand Wagoneer. We have a powered tilt telescopic steering column and kind of a drive position, I would say, that's not going to be the greatest for shorter people, because this is as low to the ground as the seat front cushion can go. I can move the seat back cushion a little bit further back, or the seat bottom cushion, I should say, at the back a little further down. But for taller people, this is going to be fine. We have lots of headroom here and a decent amount of legroom, but some of the shorter people may find it tricky to actually reach the pedals. A common complaint with the previous QX80 is that it may have been big on the outside, but it wasn't big on the inside. They've really addressed that with this generation though, adding about 6 inches of combined legroom, and it's really noticeable in the second row and back there in the third row as well. Headroom, that's still a little bit lower than some of the full-size competition. You can see that this model has the panoramic moonroof, and I have, maybe about half an inch of headroom left. We have the power second row seat in this model, but it doesn't adjust for height. This particular trim has the captain's chairs, so we find a big walkway there across the middle. I'll show you that in a bit. Cup holders there, USB charge ports, and these seats definitely move a little bit slower than some of the manual designs, and they're not quite as comfortable as the very top-end seats that we find in something like a Grand Wagoneer. And keep in mind that the QX80's price tag definitely gets up into that over $100,000 territory. Now, one nice touch is that even though we have powered second row seats, you can still leave a child seat latch anchored into place and tilt and slide these seats forward. So if you do have kids in forward-facing child seats, this may be a lot more practical than some of the competition. So how about that all-important third row? Well, let's check out this power second row seat in action. So you can see you do have to be a little patient for that to flip and slide forward. But once you do, it is actually pretty easy to get back here into the third row, where we find a third row that's, let's be frank, not quite as big as the one in the Jeep especially. That Wagoneer and Grand Wagoneer has a huge, huge third row, bigger actually than quite a number of minivans. The second row seat automatically returns to this position, which is not all the way back in its tracks. Let's see if I can reach around here and actually move it all the way back in its tracks. Yep, there we go. You can see, however, I still have legroom in the back. Not as much as I did before, but certainly usable, and usable headroom as well. My head is now touching the ceiling. If I try to get back there to the headrest, I'd have to kind of crane my head to one side, although it's fairly comfortable for a short journey. We have 3 seats back here. We have air vents up in the ceiling, 2 USB-C charge points, 1 on each side, and 4 cup holders total for the third row. Moving back up to the second row for a moment, we have ratchet-style armrests on the inboard side of those captain's chairs, a fixed-in-place console in the middle. I see a lot of kids just stepping on that as they go through because this walkway is on the narrow side. We have 2 cup holders there, 2 USB-C charge ports, and this has a 3-zone rather than a 4-zone climate control, so everybody in the back shares 1 zone. When it comes to fitting child seats, especially with latch anchors, the QX80 does very well. We have latch anchors that don't have any flap or any sort of door there. Really easy to latch on a base station like this. Installation of some of the bulkier child seats like this Kiko seat are pretty easy because we have a decent amount of room in here. So thanks to the high ceilings, you can easily climb over seats and get those latch anchors nice and tight. And importantly, thanks to the legroom increase, there's enough room for me to comfortably put a rear-facing child seat like this for extended rear-facing behind a 6-foot-tall driver or passenger up front. And the QX80 has one more family-friendly feature up its sleeve. Whether you have a little one in a forward-facing seat like this or a docking station right like that, you can tilt and slide these seats forward for easier access with a child seat latch anchored into place. Now obviously it's not going to work on something like this Cluck base station if you were using the load leg, but if you aren't, it does make it a lot easier to get back there into the third row. Now you notice it does have that anti-pinch protection there, so depending on exactly how far forward your child seat is relative to the front seats, you could find yourself having that reverse mechanism there. That's a little bit less convenient with these powered seats than the manual seats that have this same motion that we find in other Nissan, Infiniti, and competitive vehicles as well. Basically, you just have to be willing to stop it here, have the car beep, and then get back there into the third row. Then it will power slide itself right back into place. Logically, this only works if your child seat or your base station is latch anchored only into place. It's not going to work if you do plan on using the shoulder belt. Behind this big power hatch, we find an extraordinarily square cargo area, but not a terribly big one. 22 cubic feet is what we find back here. Enough to put 2 of these 22-inch roller bags like this and still close the hatch. You could actually stack 4 of them back here. But in our important 24-inch roller bag test, 2 was the most I could squeeze back here. It's just barely too small for 3, and you can't put them long ways there because of how close the third row is to the rear. As we look around this interior, keep in mind that we are in a top-end trim, so this one has an MSRP of around $100,000. We have a sunglass holder right there, controls for the big panoramic moonroof, slide to the side sun visors, grab handles for 3 of the 4 seating positions. The driver does not get one. Height-adjustable shoulder belts and height-adjustable headrests. These headrests have a really eccentric design to them because these are the Klipsch Audio headrest speakers. So they actually have speakers integrated on both sides of that for the driver and front passenger. It's really a cool look. You can see extra speakers going on in the ceiling. There are tons and tons of speakers in here. Those air vents for the second and third row. And you can see from this angle that big panoramic moonroof, which goes to almost the second row's heads. As you'd expect, the driver and front passenger have the most comfortable seats in the house. They also have the most side support. You can see those inflatable side bolsters there, and the more aggressive seat bottom cushion bolsters than we find in the second row. We have a bit of piping there and kind of a two-tone design where the back of the seat is charcoal. The second row, as you can see, doesn't have as much bolstering. We have those latch anchor positions right there in the center. And then we also have latch anchors back there in that third row seating position that you can see. Those are, of course, the least comfortable seats in here. The general design of the door panels is very similar both front and rear, as is the materials quality. We have a suede insert at the bottom of that soft touch armrest in the door, and then stitched goods above that. We find real wood trim on the doors, something that Lexus has been doing away with in some of their less expensive models, but we still find wood trim available in certain trims of the LX. There's an ambient light strip running there, and obviously in the back seats you don't find the 2-position seat memory. There's a little bit of storage going on down there at the bottom of the door. You can see right there we have a bottle holder and then a storage well just beside it, but you will find some harder plastics down at the bottom of the door that you don't find in all of the competition. I'd say in terms of both parts quality and parts consistency, this is very similar to most of the competition. We have a soft touch upper section of the dash that has been after stitched, a stitched midsection of the dash right there as well. You can see the Infiniti logo, or rather Infiniti spelled out in that shiny black plastic strip, and that's perhaps my only complaint. You can see how reflective it is. It also is likely going to scratch a little bit more easily than something like real wood trim in this same section. Below that area, we have a bin-style glove compartment. I was not able to fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside there, but all of this lower section of the dash is also soft touch material. So definitely a lot of premium materials going on. And speaking of premium materials, shameless plug for our podcast. If you're not subscribing to us on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcasting program, now's the time to do that. In the dashboard, we have a twin 14-inch LCD setup. So you can see two 14-inch screens, one side by side. They're really close together, although they don't have the effect of just one big screen like we find in the Escalade. I think that's a bit of a bummer because we have a really cool camera feature. If I pull up the right camera here, then you'll notice you can expand that camera out to use not quite all of both screens, but actually a significant portion of each screen. This is really going to help you in tighter urban areas where you're trying to look around the corner of the vehicle because that corner is actually quite far away, as you can see there. The rest of the camera setup, that's basically the same as the 360-degree camera design we've seen from Infiniti for a while, including the transparent hood technology there. Built-in factory navigation, all of that's pretty similar. This is running the latest software, which includes the Google Assistant. Nice touch there. And we have the latest instrument cluster software as well, with a few different designs. Basically 3 of them. We can change the meter view here. That's the enhanced view. We also have an elegant view, and we have this view right here. All 3 views will have some moving map information, and it supports 2-screen CarPlay. Interesting twist though, it will actually also borrow the mapping information out of Waze on your CarPlay and stick it there in the instrument cluster, something we don't see in all 2-screen CarPlay implementations. Going back to the dashboard, we find more real wood trim here. It's a little bit dark, so again, difficult to see. Kind of a silvery strip there. They put the track forward-backward buttons on either side of that volume knob. Engine start-stop button there. Really great place to put a trailer brake controller. Unfortunately, we don't find one here. Down here we have a touchscreen panel for the climate control, also the front heated and ventilated seats. The second row also features seat heating and ventilation. This is where we find the drive mode selector also, the button for 4-high. We don't have a 2-speed transfer case in here. If you want that, you have to get the Armada. There's no storage behind that little panel. I think that's a bit of a missed opportunity. They could have given us more storage, but we do have a storage area underneath that entire console. There's a Hunt and Peck style shifter down here, drive and manual. Again, lots of shiny black plastic, a button to control the adaptive air suspension, and the 360-degree camera button. Moving back from there, find a big wide center console with big chunky cup holders, Qi wireless charging mat that closes off like that. Lots of stitched materials here, including the soft touch lower section. We have 2 USB ports inside, and you can choose whether you want to use wireless or wired CarPlay. If you want to store stuff in your center console, you'll find the larger compartment right here with a divider. For some reason, this is still wrapped in plastic, but it is actually a pretty deep storage area, not quite as wide as the entire console, however. On the driver's side of the dash, we have a full-color head-up display, and you'll notice that Infiniti did not give us a tablet style just tacked onto the dash look for the screens. Instead, they have a structural element behind, so it just looks like a regular instrument cluster binnacle from a few years ago with a very flat front and no hood. There's that same instrument cluster there, and the new Infiniti steering wheel, flat bottom, chunky grip down there on the rear, kind of these interesting openings in these sections. This is the control for not just that multifunction instrument cluster, but also the infotainment system. So you can switch whether you want this button module to control that screen or that screen over there. Track forward backward has been split from volume up down, and then we find the adaptive cruise control and aggressive lane centering software there. Paddle shifters back there on the back of the steering wheel. You see turn signal stalk and windshield wiper stalk over there. And then to the left of the wheel, we find a button for the lane centering steering system, auto start, stop, enable, disable, the auto brake hold, the electric parking brake, and some ambient lighting controls. And last but not least, on the driver's door, we find more shiny black plastic, but they make up for it by, again, more of that open pore wood trim. All right, it's time to get the QX80 out on the road, where we find that this is actually a little bit slower 0 to 60 than the old model, and that did surprise me a bit. 0 to 60 in this model happened in 6.2 seconds versus 5.9 seconds the last time I drove the V8 equipped QX80. Here's what I think is going on. I think there's just a little bit of turbo lag when you first start off. So from a stop, about 3,000 RPM, everything's coming on the boil. and then we get really great acceleration. In the previous QX80, that V8 had so much low-end torque that it really felt like a rocket ship right at the first launch, and it actually felt a little bit slower a little bit later in its acceleration profile. You will notice a difference also when towing. This definitely is quicker 0 to 60 when towing a trailer than the previous QX80. Fortunately, I had some notes from the last time we drove that model on the exact same trailer I was towing with today, and this was actually a little bit quicker 0 to 60, about 9.3 seconds in this model with 3,800 pounds on the back versus just over 10 seconds in that previous QX80. We also have more gears here. This uses a 9-speed automatic transmission versus the 7-speed that we found in the previous QX80. So there could also be just a little bit more shifting going on. As far as the stopping distance, this was surprisingly good for a vehicle this size and of course this curb weight, 122 feet from 60 miles an hour to 0. The handling ability, that's also nicely dialed in. I'll go ahead and move this over to the sport mode so it changes the suspension dynamics just a little bit. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a big, heavy SUV, and it feels big and heavy, but so do the other big, heavy SUVs. Bear in mind that these scores are as compared to other entries in this segment. Unless you're talking about something like a an Escalade V, because we have one of those now, this is going to feel just about as dynamic as every other entry in this segment, except for something like a BMW X7 or a Mercedes-Benz GLS. Those are definitely more fun than this, but they're not exactly the same as this. Those are unibody SUVs. This is a body-on-frame SUV, so kind of different mission, definitely a different vibe going on. The first time I drove the QX80, I found the suspension to be a little on the firm side, and I have to reverse course there a little bit because this suspension is not firm. It's simply that the wheels and the tires here don't have much cushion. They're pretty big wheels, pretty low profile tires, and that means that a lot of the smaller imperfections are making their way into the cabin, whereas the larger imperfections like that water diversion bump, they're being soaked up pretty well. And at this point in the winter here in the redwood forest, this road is pretty darn rough. It's definitely been ridden hard and put away wet, I guess you could say. And these potholes especially are large, but as you can see, it deals with the potholes really quite well. It's just that you feel some of those smaller imperfections that I would really like to be isolated from the cabin. And that's why when it comes to the ride quality, I'm gonna give this a B+. I don't think it's quite as polished as the ride in the Escalade or the top-end versions of the Wagoneer, but it's actually pretty comparable to something like the Navigator. But the ride quality is certainly better than the previous QX80, and actually certainly better than the previous generation of the Escalade as well. In fact, actually, if you get any of those GM SUVs without the MagneRide suspension, I find their ride quality to be not quite as good as what we find in this model. Of course, this one has a 4-corner air suspension, so that certainly helps. We also have a more isolated cabin in here than many of those unibody competitors. Most of those would be smaller, mind you. 69 decibels is what I measured in here at 50 miles an hour, definitely making this right in line with something like, again, that Escalade, Navigator, Wagoneer, etc. On the other hand, fuel economy, that is definitely a little bit below the bunch. 16.9 miles per gallon is what I averaged in this model over a week of mixed driving, and that was before we did any towing testing. That's about what the EPA estimate says this should get, but that is still going to be a little bit below some of the competition. And bear in mind that this is no bigger, no squarer, and generally speaking, no less aerodynamic than those other competitors, especially some of those extended wheelbase options, like again, Escalator, Navigator, Wagoneer, Escalator, whatever we're going to call that thing, the Wagscalator, that thing. All of them are very similar in terms of aerodynamics, and some of those actually have more off-road capable additions or cousins, I guess you could say, in their lineup. I have to admit being disappointed that Infiniti didn't work just a little bit harder getting that highway fuel economy number up on this model. This one's rated for 19 mpg. I think it should have been 22 or 23 mpg, and that really would have had a positive impact on that combined fuel efficiency score, especially if you plan on road tripping your full-size SUV. I can certainly see a lot of people doing that. If you want better fuel economy, you will find it, generally speaking, in real-world driving in the Navigator, the Wagoneer, and yep, even that Escalade also. The Lexus, it has a hybrid system, but I wouldn't exactly call it the most efficient hybrid. And even though it is smoother than some of Lexus's other rear-wheel drive hybrids that we've driven lately, it's still not quite as smooth as what we find in this QX80. As far as on-the-road bottom lines go, Infiniti did exactly what they needed to do in order to make this competitive, but they didn't break any new ground in the full-size segment. Although the QX80 is definitely more expensive than it's been in the past, as you can see on this chart, it is still one of the less expensive luxury options. When you take a look at the pricing on the Wagoneer or the Yukon, keep in mind that those base versions get a lot less premium than the QX80, but they're here because we have the top-end models, the Denali from the Yukon lineup, and of course the Grand Wagoneer from Jeep, which really is an Escalade Navigator competitor. The other thing to keep in mind is that the QX80 and the Lexus LX come in only one wheelbase, and that definitely makes them different than the other body-on-frame options in America from the big three, because those have short and long wheelbase versions. Our first competitor has to be the other model that doesn't have a long wheelbase variant though, the Lexus LX, because in my mind, the Infiniti and the Lexus are the two most natural competitors for one another. The Lexus LX doesn't necessarily feel more premium in this generation. That's something that Lexus has kind of been walking back perhaps a little bit. Their classic wood plastered on everywhere, leather plastered on everywhere. They've dialed that back, and so even though we do find real wood trim in the LX, like we don't find in some other recent Lexus products, there's not as much of it. It's not used in as impressive or as in-your-face of a way as it has been in previous Lexus models. Now, I'm a little bit sad about that, but I'd love to know what you think in the comments section below. Am I just getting too old that I want wood trim everywhere, or is that something that you think the average Lexus customer still is interested in? Now, Lexus is definitely going in a different direction with the LX and the GX in this generation. They're trying to make them more off-road capable, and that's why we find the new LX 700, and of course the off-road versions. Strangely, Infiniti doesn't have an off-road version of the QX80, although there is an off-road version of the Armada, so who knows what we'll see in the future. If I were choosing between these two, I would probably choose the Infiniti based on value. I also really like the audio system in the QX80 and the big two-screen setup in the dashboard. Even though the software doesn't feel quite as modern, quite as snazzy as some of the systems in this segment, I think the two big screens work really well and the functionality of the software is excellent. The price tag's also a big deal here because the top-end Lexus LX ends up at $141,000, $142,000 practically. The top-end version of the QX80 isn't really that much different. It's right at $112,795. If you're thinking about the LX Hybrid, check out our video on that LX Hybrid. I was actually a little bit disappointed in its performance. It wasn't really any quicker than the non-hybrid model, so I'd just skip over that hybrid if I were you. I would not, however, skip over the General Motors triplets of SUVs, depending on exactly which one you're looking at here, because we have, actually I guess quartet, because we have the Tahoe, the Suburban, the Yukon, and the Escalade all together in this set. Now, the Escalade is the most direct competitor to the QX80 of this bunch, but the Yukon Denali is also in this line. The Escalade is a little bit less expensive than some of the other options, starting at $90,095, but if you get carried away with options, it will go up to $177,745 because there is that bonkers supercharged Escalade V. Even excluding the Escalade V, this lineup gets pretty expensive, especially when you consider that we now have the Escalade IQ, which is completely unrelated to the regular Escalade. It's a completely different vehicle bearing the name and some of the styling cues. It's 100% electric. The regular Escalades, they're of course gasoline or diesel, because we do have a 3-liter inline-six diesel available depending on exactly the options you're looking for. And rather sadly, the model year involved, because that's the bad news. For 2025, the Escalade is actually no longer available with that diesel engine, meaning you will have to choose one of the other General Motors SUVs if you want that efficient engine option. And I think that inline-six diesel is fantastic. Honestly, I don't know why Cadillac canceled it, because practically every limo driver out there that I've ever seen in an Escalade seems like they all have that inline-six because it is efficient and it actually does work really quite well. Now, next up we have the Wagoneer, which has new, less expensive trims for 2024 and 2025, which is why this price tag is a lot lower than you may have remembered for the Wagoneer. $60,945 is where this starts, and there are now extra gradations between that and the top-end $117,000, $118,000 model. There's a short one, there's a long one, there's a grand one, there's a less grand one. I don't understand why we have a Wagoneer and a Grand Wagoneer and a Wagoneer L and a Grand Wagoneer L. I think it could have just been good, grand, and grander, whatever. Anyway, lots of Wagoneers to choose from. Excellent interior design in these models. I think the wood paneling, the wood trim, the leather, the dashboard, everything is really nicely done.
The problem for me with the Wagoneer is the passenger screen, which I think is stupid, and you have to get it in some of the upper end trims. And up until recently, it's price tag, but Jeep has softened that a bit, so you can get in the Wagoneer a lot less expensive than before. It has their excellent new inline-6 turbocharged engine, which is all kinds of fantastic. That's really, really smooth. I think it's the nicest engine in this segment as far as smooth and linear power delivery goes, but it doesn't have that V8 burble that it used to because that V8 engine is now gone. Towing capacity has gone down a little bit in the Wagoneer because of that engine swap, but it is still definitely higher than the QX80. Actually, Wagoneer has basically the highest tow limits in this segment. Navigator will get pretty high, but Wagoneer, generally speaking, is going to be a little bit higher. Last word of caution, if you're looking at the base trims of Wagoneer, the rubbery dash bits, they get a little rubbery. And the high-end ones, they have leather coating everything, but the lower-end ones, just keep those plastics in mind. There's a reason the price tag goes a little bit lower. But leather upholstery is standard, and actually a lot of the luxury options you would consider optional in some of the competition is actually still standard for 2025, even with that less expensive Wagoneer. So it's worth a look. And then let's talk about the Navigator. The Navigator has been dramatically refreshed for 2025, but not redesigned. So the bulk of this SUV is the same as before. Basically the same story with the Expedition. If you want to know all about the Navigator, stay tuned. There is either a video already on the channel or it's coming up soon where I'm driving the refreshed Navigator. The big thing to know though, again, is that the structure of this doesn't change. So the frame, the engine, the suspension design, generally speaking, is very similar to before. We do find some slight tweaks here and there, but nothing major. The exterior has been restyled in line with the recently redesigned Lincoln Nautilus, and we get an innovative sort of clamshell hatch and tailgate combination in the rear. It's very Range Rover-like, where you can have the hatch open only, or you can have the hatch and the tailgate open, so that way you can have something to keep your groceries from rolling out, or you have someplace to sit for your tailgate party. It's the only option in this segment that has that particular feature. But it does mean that the hatch glass does not open separately. And why would it? Because we have the hatch there. I think it's kind of a cool feature, but long-term reliability, we'll have to see exactly how that pans out with that clamshell opening rear end. The interior is really nicely done. I like the style, but I think that the parts quality is not quite as high as the top-end Wagoneer and the top-end Escalade. I will say that the Escalade's dashboard design, I think, is done really, really well. The wood trim on the dash, the stitched materials up there, the two big screens, actually really, really big screens that we find at the top end Escalade are definitely over the top. And the Escalade's passenger screen, even though it's still not overly useful, I think is my favorite as far as passenger screens go, because visually it looks like the theme is consistent across the dashboard. Actually, the big expansive screens that we find in the Navigator are just fine for that exact same reason. Now on the Escalade, it's kind of a 60-40 screen split, whereas on the Navigator, it's a 50-50 screen split. So the seam's in the middle. The Escalade, they kind of shift that seam over to the passenger side. On the Wagoneer, they just went for a whole lot of screens everywhere. So just screens coating everywhere on the interior. Screens down the center console, screens in the back, screens on the driver's side, and a screen on the passenger side. But that passenger side screen's just not my cup of tea. Anyway, let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. If I were shopping for a vehicle in this segment, I think the QX80 definitely has a lot going for it. The ride quality is decent. The handling quality is not bad. But it doesn't feel quite as special as maybe I want out of my full-size SUV. And it's not quite as full-sized as the extended wheelbase versions. If my money were on the line, I have to admit, as old as it's getting now, the Escalade is still a really good option. I think it's attractive, it's comfortable with the adaptive suspension system. Also, the V8 engine is lovely. I'm really sad that diesel engine is gone, but I could probably get over it eventually. Or I might go for a Wagoneer. Depending on the trim level, you may be able to escape that passenger screen. You can in the lower end trims, but exactly which features you're looking for, you may get saddled with that particular option. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, or would you go all 1980s bling with the new Navigator, which is definitely taking things to an interesting new level, where we find copper accent wheels. Yep, basically a gold wheel with your gold color matched Navigator. It is possible for 2025. Check it out. Let me know what you think. Bye.